Today we'll be discussing student TR, who is a fourth grader in my class. In front of me I have a collection of data that I collected from the Morris Informal Reading Inventory that I recently administered to this student. So the Morris inventory is essentially an assessment that helps me better understand the student's word recognition ability as well as their comprehension level. So to begin, I started with the word recognition lists, which are a list of 20 words, sight words, that are leveled. So level 5 indicates that it's a 5th grade list of words. This student specifically was given grades 2 through 5. But the way it works is that as students answer questions, they're given half a second to tell me what the word is. If they're able to do that, then they get the word correct. And if they're unable to answer that within half a second, then they move from the timed section to the untimed section, during which they'll have an unlimited amount of time to try to identify the word. This timed portion, kind of tells me whether or not they know the sight word, and it focuses more on word recognition, whereas the untimed portion kind of identifies to me their decoding ability. And the test stops once students reach their frustration level. The next portion of this assessment is the oral reading passages. Students are given a leveled by grade level passage to read. And while this is happening, I take a running record of any errors that they make. Once the student is done with the paragraph, I ask them 6 comprehension questions. And during that, I will also mark if they get the question correct or not. Based on the number of words they read correctly, and based on the number of questions they answer correctly, I convert those into a percent, and that percent will tell me the level at which they are operating. So those levels are instructional, individual, or independent rather, and of course frustration. And this assessment ends once the student reaches their frustration level. And this specific student was given passages ranging from grade levels 3 all the way to grade level 6 once they hit their frustration level. And lastly is the silent passage reading. It follows a very similar format to the oral passage reading. Students are given just a paragraph, and it also is leveled by grade. And during this time, I do not take a running record because I cannot hear what the student is reading. Rather, this section focuses more on comprehension. I ask students, again, 6 comprehension questions at the end of the paragraph, and depending on the number of questions they answer correctly, I convert that into a percent, and that percent will tell me, again, if they are at the independent level, the instructional level, or the frustration level. And this assessment also ends once students reach their frustration level. So if we were to look at the data collected for this student TR, looking at word recognition, the word recognition levels provided to this student started at grade 2 and ended at grade 5 once the student reached their frustration level. At this level, the student was only able to identify 45% of the words. However, I will say that when given the opportunity to decode the words, he was able to bump that up to 75% of words identified. And that was a trend for the grade level 4 as well. He was able to bump up the 75% to a 90% when given the opportunity to decode, which tells me that this student needs a little bit of work with his sight words. I'd like to pull a small group during reading perhaps and allow this student to practice being exposed to more sight words and practice identifying sight words. That way this student isn't bogged down trying to decode while reading, because that can really take away from comprehension. So that's something that I'd like to work on, but I do feel confident about his decoding abilities. But for right now, he's right on grade level. He's right at the instructional level for grade level 4, and well on his way to being instructional for grade level 5. In the oral passage section, this student was given passages ranging from grade level 3 all the way to grade level 6 when he hit his frustration level. During that, he was able to identify or correctly read 89% of the words in the passage. Something I noticed while going through the running records I took was that most of the issues that or challenges that this student faced were due to his rapid pace that he kept while reading. So this is the 6th grade copy. Most of his issues were, or challenges rather, were omissions. They also were very specific vocabulary that he could not properly read and had some trouble with while we were reading. Another thing that happened was the inserting of words that weren't there and the misreading of relatively simple words. I do feel that this student's rapidness or rapid rate of reading did take away from some of the comprehension aspects. The more problems he had reading, the worse his comprehension score became, which makes a lot of sense. If you don't understand what you're reading, you're not going to do well on the comprehension portion. So I would encourage this student to take his time reading and maybe give him a few comprehension strategies to help him as he reads. I would like him to try rereading a little bit more. Right here is an example of him rereading, but this was not a frequent occurrence during this assessment. I'd like to encourage him to reread and check for understanding. I'd also like him to practice some higher level strategies such as questioning or reading ahead for more information, which isn't necessarily something that can happen on this passage, but in authentic situations, I'd like to see him do that. Another thing I noticed is that the number of errors he made that changed the meaning of the passages he was reading were relatively low. This specific passage actually had the highest amount of meaning-changing errors. I do think that this is a good sign. That to me again reiterates the fact that these mistakes are simple. They're happening because he's moving a little too quickly through the paragraphs. So I'd like to see him slow down, and that's something that I want to talk with him and about during reading conferences. I'd like to start conferring with him a little bit more during the week. Right now I have him as 1 conference per week, but I'd like to bump that up to maybe 2 or potentially 3. And in those reading conferences, I'd like to give him a specific goal to work on for the week until our next meeting, whether that's a comprehension strategy or that's, slowing down in his reading. It'll depend on what I see with his specific books, but I'd like to see him a few more times a week to talk about this. Overall, I found that for this student, that the highest oral reading passage that was at the instructional level for both recognition and comprehension was 4th grade. His word recognition percentage was at 96, which is right at that instructional level, and the comprehension percentage was 83, which is again right in that instructional level. So he's right on grade level, which is very, very encouraging at this point in the year. It's still very early. I do feel that with a little bit of support, as I've talked about, and making some more clear goals for him, we could see some great improvements by the end of the year. And I look forward to seeing what kind of progress TR can make this year.